Hey everybody, it's Todd Dills here with our annual Overdrive Radio Year in Review. Before we get started, I just wanted to say thanks for hanging in with us through yet another big year for trucking as an owner-operator. One with absolutely huge challenges for sure, and we'll hear about a lot of them again today, but hopefully, by the end, there's something that sparks a new idea, or urges you on to completion of an old goal with new rigor, with new vigor. Anyhow, thanks again. Enjoy this countdown to 2023. '22 was a big one for Overdrive Radio. Thanks to longtime contributor and trucker-songwriter Long Haul Paul Marhoefer and the pros at Muscle Shoals Music Marketing, we got an updated theme. You're hearing that now, of course, in the form of Marhoefer's Legend of the Snakeman. We also got the nod for Best Podcast from the business journalism folks behind the Jesse H. Neal Awards earlier in the year. That wouldn't be possible, of course, but for the very fact of you, the listeners, the stories told by so many among you that aired throughout the course of this year. For this edition of Overdrive Radio for December 30th, 2022, we're going to count down to 2023, the top 10 episodes that garnered the most ears throughout the year, with an extra 5, too, that got quite close to that top 10 cut. Honorable mentions, as it were. We'll hear about double brokering and other freight fraud and lax enforcement to combat it. Thus, it's de facto enabling, as it were.
There is provisions in the federal statute that says that the government, on behalf of the public, can go after a fraudster and charge him and anybody else involved in the fraud up to $10,000 per violation. Now, armed with that kind of support, if we had an activist agency, we could certainly make some examples of some of these scams and police the industry. But the FMCSA has no appetite for that.
We'll hear a variety of perhaps unpopular opinions about regulations.
If there is one way that we need to be leveling the playing field, which is this, this hot ticket term,
Right.
Training is where we need to do it.
Someone that has a proven record should be able to make their own decisions.
And plenty in the way of brass tacks owner-operator business advice and analysis.
Generally speaking, when we get a really boom freight market, it lasts 6, 9, maybe 12 months at most.
Have to be the businessman first and then the trucker second, because you have to do what makes sense in business if you want to stay.
It was certainly a wild year, as my colleague Alex Lockey's year in brief yesterday made plenty clear. For all the guests in the podcast, 2022 was no more both difficult and perhaps fortunate than it was for 2022 small fleet champ contender Brian Stoll of Super Highs Trucking.
She's starting to put the 12 lead on me to do an EKG. Before she finished getting all those leads on me, she knew the type of heart attack I was having. And she's like, I've seen this before. I know exactly what you're having. This is not good. She said, if we go to the hospital in town, which was literally a mile and a half away, and went there first and went through their intake process, I would have never made it.
A couple of quick-thinking professionals, in other words, saved Brian Stoll's life.
Your heart is like the engine of a truck. It only has so many revolutions in it. It only has so many beats.
Stoll's own heart beats on, I'm happy to say. We exchanged a few messages just this week. Recovery has gone well, but is ongoing, he says. At once, he's feeling hopeful about the prospects for full recovery. My hope's right there with his. After a quick break for this word from the House Company, Overdrive Radio's sponsor, we'll dive right back into Stoll's story to get this countdown rolling.
When you have a diesel emergency, you don't have time to wait around for 911. Instead, call your Lifeline. Howe's Diesel Lifeline, the only emergency rescue product to for reliquefied gel fuel and de-ice frozen fuel filters without the use of harmful alcohol. Always safe to use, you can pour it directly into your fuel filters without wasting time mixing it with additional diesel fuel. So this winter, if you find yourself stuck in a bind, skip the tow. Get yourself back on the road fast with Howe's Diesel Lifeline. For more information, visit howesproducts.com.
That's HOWES, howesproducts.com. Leave a message on our podcast line with your name and mailing address, and I'll send you a bottle of Diesel Lifeline. With the weather this past week, and no doubt more to come this winter, could be your truck's ticket back to rolling. That's 615-852-8530. Leave your name and mailing address there, and we'll get it to your doorstep. Okay, here we go.
You know, for every wrong, there was a right that went along with it.
Okay.
So the day was a normal day, normal at-home day, dispatching trucks, dealing with trucking problems as they arise, putting fires out. We had a business meeting that evening, and we had one driver that we just hired in town that we had put up in the hotel. We were just waiting for the truck a couple mechanical issues with the truck to get finished up, you know?
Right.
So we could get him in the truck going. So, and there was a spot for him to come out to the supper club with us for our meeting. So we invited him along and gave him a really nice prime rib dinner, as we do almost every new hire. You know, we like to take them out and say, hey, when you're in town, you may not get anything from us during Driver Appreciation Week, but when you're in town, we'll take care of you.
Yeah.
You know, you come through town, we take you out to the supper club, get you a real nice dinner, crab legs, prime rib, whatever you want, put you up in the hotel. You know, you need to do shopping, we'll take you shopping. You know, it's little things like that. Take them out for breakfast. You know, I think that is more important than, once a week or once a year during driver. Here's $25. You know, that's almost embarrassing to do stuff like that. You know, so we went out to dinner. I had a nice prime rib, real good dinner. Afterwards, we finish up our meeting. We go to stop over at Walmart quick for a couple minutes and come home. Just another day. It's about 7:30 in the evening. I'm laying down because I get up. I start my day about 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning. So early to bed, early to rise, right?
Right.
So I'm laying in bed. I was just getting ready to doze off, and our dispatcher called. And we normally talk at, the end of the day, every day, just to kind of catch up and, make sure everybody's on the same page and make plans for the next day. Well, he called, so we're talking, and after a couple minutes, I had this little tinge in my back, just a little sore back, but it's up between my shoulder blades, which, after breaking my back and having a spinal fusion many years ago, this is not something that is out of the ordinary.
Right.
Every once in a while, if I either do too much during the day, or if I'm lazy for 2 days and just laying around for 2 days, I will get muscle spasms because of I still got hardware in my back and stuff like that, so it gives you back problems along the way, but nothing a couple ibuprofen don't fix. So that's kind of what I thought was going on. I just kind of sore. I'm like, okay, well, I was uncomfortable, and I'm like, all right, well, let me see if I can find a tennis ball, put up on the wall, and get my back up against it and massage these muscles. I couldn't find it. I'm like, all right, well, next best thing, let's go get some ibuprofen, and we'll get some of that in my system, and it'll It'll slowly relax the muscles and we'll be fine. Well, I never did get a chance to take the ibuprofen. Some of the symptoms with having a heart attack, it's sore back, sore chest. It's not very often to where a heart attack is that TV chest clenching pain, right?
Right.
That's not really one of the things. I mean, if you're to that point to where you're clenching your chest because of a heart attack, you're pretty much on death's doorstep at that point. Your heart's pretty much stopping. But it's all the tiny little signs and symptoms prior to that you really got to be aware of. And they're they can be, what's the word I'm looking for?
Kind of vague.
Yes.
Attributable to a lot of other things, as you're saying.
Right.
With the back
Absolutely.
pain.
Like my sore back, like I said, that's how it started. And I'm like, well, this is kind of turning into a major muscle spasm.
Brian Stahl tells the rest of the story of that fateful night for him, with huge implications for him and his almost 10-truck business, in the podcast for September 23rd. His principal message? Do the hard work through the years to keep healthy, and listen to what your body is telling you, no doubt. The same month, ATBS Vice President Mike Hosted presented his typical mid-year benchmarking analysis based on cost, revenue, and bedrock income averages for owner-operators among ATBS Business Services clientele. This year, that analysis featured a big reckoning with increased costs throughout the first half of the year, even as spot market freight fell back and rates tanked there. Plenty of owners had moved back to leasing with larger carriers for better faring contract rates, and generally, while the revenue picture was up, all of it was offset by increased costs. Not just fuel either, as we know.
Starting in May, things got a lot tougher to be in the spot market. And so what we last saw 2-3 weeks ago was there were only 65 loads per one truck looking for freight, and rates had gone down to 283. Well, since I put this slide together 2 weeks ago,
Hosted was speaking just about 2 weeks back from the date of this podcast's airing on September 30th, 2022. The dynamics he's about to describe here have only continued since as well.
it's fallen even further. So now there's about 55 loads per one truck looking for a load, and rates have gone down to about 263 in the spot market. And in the spot market, as most of you know, that's an all-inclusive rate. There's no fuel surcharge. That's baked into the rate. So rates have really fallen off in the spot market as of about May, and continue to fall. So that really tells us that, it's really shifted in the favor of the shippers, and things have gotten a lot harder. We saw a huge migration of ICs going from a fleet to, getting their own authority. And we're starting to see a migration back where those folks that went and got their own authority are struggling to get the rates they need. And that has caused a big migration back towards major motor carriers. So that's big picture spot market. And then when we get more granular, what I did was I backed out the fuel surcharge. So again, the fuel surcharge is baked into it. So what I did was took the average from that time. And really what you can see is, again, in 2018, things were really good. After we subtract out the fuel surcharge, rates were about $2.22 a mile. 2019, as I said, things got really tough, and it went down to about $1.70 after we backed out the fuel surcharge. Early COVID, rates were about $1.90. And then when things got really, really, really good, at the peak there, we were seeing $2.50 rates, even when we back out the fuel surcharge. But as of now, because of that high fuel cost, rates have gone down to $2.13. And again, since I put this together, they've actually fallen below $2 a mile in the spot market on an average rate. So the spot market's gotten considerably tougher recently. And I know that you all, especially you all that run in the spot market, have felt that pain. So it's just been a big dynamic shift. I think the important thing to get out of this is that, the last 2 years have been the best freight market we've ever seen. Generally speaking, when we get a really boom freight market, it lasts 6, 9, maybe 12 months at most. But because of what's happened, in this COVID time and what, all this capacity shortage, truck shortage, you name it, it lasted longer. So what normally happens is when freight gets really good, like it was the last 2 years, trucking companies go out and they buy a bunch of trucks, they hire a bunch of drivers, and they flood the market with capacity and trucks and things like that, which crashes the market and normalizes it and takes it back down. But because there were no new drivers, you couldn't go to school, because there were trucks that you couldn't buy, they were really expensive, or they just weren't available because OEMs weren't putting them out, we really saw a big boom freight cycle that lasted considerably longer than what we normally see. And so really what we're seeing in 2022 is things are really just normalizing right now. It seems like it's bad, but it's not. It's normal. It's just things have been so good the last 2 years that we've honestly kind of gotten spoiled. So I know it's still kind of shifting downwards, and we haven't, gotten to the exact equilibrium yet. We don't know exactly where we are, but right now things are normal. And what I tell our clients and what I tell our trucking companies that we work with and everybody that I talk to is, if you back out 2020 and 2021, if those didn't exist, we would still be in a pretty decent freight market right now. It's just things were so good that it seems like things are bad right now.
The subsequent 3 and more months since that podcast aired may well tell a different story. Recent poll results at overdriveonline.com showed very dim expectations for business among owner-operator readers asked to assess the coming year. 45% of readers expected year 2023 business performance to fare worse than this year. Barely 1 in 10 readers thought things were looking better for them in the new year, for what that's worth. 2022 has been tough, but for Cap Trucking small fleet owner Chris Porcelli, 2021 was an even rougher ride in some ways. Given twin disasters he detailed for Overdrive Radio listeners this fall, part of coverage of his business as a then contender in Overdrive's 2022 Small Fleet Championship. Porcelli and Cap Trucking, as regular listeners will know, went on to win that award in October in the 3 to 10 truck division of this year's competition. Prior to the big win, though, his story of persistence and triumph over a stolen truck, the Custom 389 flagship of the fleet, and a freight scam he's still in litigation over to this day, really turned a few ears his way.
The thing was, the load had to pick up on a Friday, but it didn't deliver till Monday. And where he was loading to where he lives, I said, look, it would make a lot more sense if you just took the truck with you. Because at the time we were parking at this hotel, we knew the manager, etc. So it was real quiet. There was a sheriff's station like diagonally across the street, a hospital. I'm like, this can't be a terrible area. I was wrong. He went there with the load, parked it. He checked on the truck that Sunday morning. By Sunday evening, the truck was gone. He got in Monday morning, 4 or 5 o'clock, I don't know, 5 o'clock in the morning, let's say. And he called me and he said, the truck's gone. I'm thinking it got impounded. I'm thinking like it got towed because they saw it at a hotel. And I said, well, everything's gone. He says, no, the trailer's still here. The truck's gone.
Wow.
Well, then my antennas went up, and he said, he almost started crying. He says, Chris, the GPS is on the grass. I just found it. So anyway, the hotel wound up playing back the security footage. And at the time, and even still to this day, there was a crew going around South Georgia, North Florida. They were driving a black Ford dually diesel pickup truck, all tinted out, had Texas license plates on it. Well, they wound up finding this truck and finding some sort of, house that they were using somewhere in the woods of Florida. And it looked like a Gone in 60 Seconds wall of cars, except they were trucks.
Wow.
And they had pictures of guys that I know with beautiful, beautiful rides, sitting there in truck stops and rest areas, at receiving places. They had pictures of these trucks.
Wow.
And on there was a picture of 2 of mine. So I wound up using that information to tell a few of my friends, hey, like, your truck's hot, like they got you, like, watch yourself. And we were all my guys were scared for a few weeks. Nobody wanted to even drive or park the truck. They were scared, of being held up or, whatever. So it was a scary time. And my wife was pregnant at the time. And it was just a bad time for me. I paid the truck off after 4 years of owning it. I got the truck, and I didn't know this at the time, but I bought the truck on the day my grandfather passed away.
Okay.
So inside the truck, I had a plaque made where the Peterbilt, side is and the passenger side of the air ducts. and it said custom built for, and it had my grandfather's name on it. And I did that first run up to New York myself. And my dad told me that he had passed away in the hospital when I got there.
Oh, man.
I got the truck. So I was like, man, truck had a lot of sentimental value to me.
Yeah.
Goes without saying. We had put it in a few truck shows down here in Florida. I had put a lot of time and effort into it. The driver kept it clean. It was, everybody knew that truck. Never recovered. Insurance offered me an insult of an offer on it. I said, you can keep your claim. I'm not going to even put that on my record for 3 years and be penalized for it, because it's not going to buy the truck back. It wasn't even close to buying the truck.
Porcelli turned to additional security in a 2-key system, essentially, for all of his 5 trucks, in addition to other added security measures with the trailer's tracking system by Thermo King. The freight scam he suffered, too, redoubled his efforts on core business to effect. And that wasn't the only scam that saw air on Overdrive Radio and at overdriveonline.com throughout the year. The huge explosion of double brokering that's happened the last couple of years, too, was the subject of another most listened to podcast featuring transportation attorney Hank Seaton. Seaton feels the reality of how these entities take advantage of FMCSA's registration system to create otherwise legitimate seeming motor carrier and broker authorities just to misrepresent their way into a freight transaction and steal several $100 at a clip. Seaton thinks there's a need for a dedicated task force to combat the issue, essentially within DOT and or the FMCSA. But there's plenty that conscientious motor carriers, brokers, and their shippers can do together to bat down some of the most egregious and expensive instances of fraud out there, when identity thieves successfully impersonate both carriers and brokers in the course of stealing cargo outright.
What we have been working on is how do we address the criminal activity, but more importantly, how do we prevent it on the front end? And those are the two things that we're trying to develop a coalition of like-minded people to address it. It involves sophisticated identity theft. And I think my advice to whoever's listening here is, when you get somebody at the end of the phone who says that I'm a household name broker, and he sends you an email, look at every letter of the email, because they can change a domain by adding or subtracting an S. And, some of the major reputable carriers in the country are having their stationery stolen, so that you think you're booking this with a reputable person. Right. But somehow that doesn't occur. And at the presentation I made at NASTIC, I took 3 examples of frauds. In one fraud, 2 very reputable major broker/carriers ended up tendering a load to a fraudster who was supposedly a broker. He brokered the loads out to small carriers. The bills of lading at time of pickup did not even show the name of the carrier. All of a sudden, they woke up about maybe 3 weeks later, and realized these loads hadn't been delivered. When they started tracing them, it turned out they were copper wire. And the amount of the scam was over $2.6 million. And fortunately enough, the parties involved were big enough to eat that. But as last I've heard, and we're now 6 months downstream, neither the FBI, the FMCSA, the state police, nobody can find what happened to the copper wire. And it's humorous. If you look at those particular bills of lading, the logo names, I don't want to hammer on those guys. I mean, they were reputable, but they basically had their name on the bill of lading as the respective carrier.
And these were brokers.
Well, they were carrier/brokers. Okay, so, I mean, you couldn't tell from the bill of lading whether it was the carrier or the broker. But whoever was on the dock was having some dude come in and say, I'm here to pick up pro number 1005 going to Hoppick, New York, and they put $250,000 worth of copper wire on the truck. Now what happens is copper wire leaves El Paso, and the fraudster calls to Truck Charlie and says, look, that's been reconsigned. What do I need to pay you to have you take it to Chicago? So all 7 of these loads were reconsigned to an empty warehouse. And that's the last anybody has seen of the product. So any way you slice or dice that's larceny by fraud. Okay? And it's a big ticket. So you can see there how the fraudster works, and you can also see that underlying it is the real problem that the carrier who was supposed to pick this up should have been saying, why are these logo carriers' names on these bills?
Yeah, I'm the
carrier.
Yeah.
And there is a law. You don't have to have a bill of lading anymore, but you do have to issue a receipt for the goods. They show the origin, the destination, and the name of the carrier. So I think, and you Todd, you've been this a long time, from what we can see, well over 2/3, maybe 3/4 of the truckload shipments are picked up and delivered without the name of the pickup or delivery carrier.
Yeah, right.
And the guy on the dock doesn't have to worry his pretty little head if the guy's got the right number. Well, the first thing in the supply chain protocol, changing this around, is we're suggesting that brokers and shippers put as part of their contract how the cow's going to eat the cabbage and provide that the bill of lading will reflect the name of the authorized carrier, and that the name of the authorized carrier at time of booking will be transmitted to the consignor, so the consignor knows who to expect.
Right.
And similarly, from a carrier's point of view, if you've once been burned by one of these things, you need to tell your truck driver that he's not Hank Seaton. He's Hank Seaton working for Todd's Trucking, and that when he goes in, if Todd's Trucking isn't on the bill of lading, and the bill of lading doesn't say send freight bill to the broker, he's got it'll say, it could say origin consignor, destination, somebody else, but ordinarily in a bill of lading, you got a place to say, is it collect, or is it prepaid, or is it third-party bill to? Yeah. So my advice to the conscientious broker is to direct that the bill of lading be made out so that the broker who's contracted with is shown as send freight bill to X, who's responsible for payment, and that the name of the authorized carrier appear on the bill. Now, this is kind of pitch and catch.
Seems simple, right? Yet, in practice, putting these procedures in place requires something of a return to the freight world that Seaton details in the same podcast of the pre-internet days, when motor carriers, brokers, and shippers, in a much larger measure than is the case for most today, personally knew the people they were dealing with, not just a voice on the phone. And coordination between all parties was a given. To beat back the massive scale of double brokering and other identity fraud ongoing, those who are successful in that regard will necessarily be able to get back to that ideal. In some measure, anyway. Okay, last of the honorable mentions just outside the top 10 podcasts of the year featured the considered experience of compliance consultant Jeff Davis with Fleet Safety Services out of Ohio, a man who specializes in assisting small to mid-sized carriers through the federal audit process. He was seeing up close the impacts of man versus machine dynamics of hours of service enforcement, the age of the electronic logging device. FMCSA and state partners are increasingly willing, he noted, to issue conditional safety ratings as a result of no more than hours violations. It's incumbent upon any motor carrier, whether one truck or many, many more, to effectively audit their records to prevent that. He told this story at the National Association of Small Trucking Companies annual conference about the log samples selected in an audit Davis helped handle.
True story. Client Chicago, 150 trucks, going through a compliance review. All right, they picked 3 drivers, and luckily the auditor picked it on Friday. So the plan was we had to log in and the password. So we were going to go in and audit those 3 drivers. Well, I got a phone call from the motor carrier. Hey, Jeff, we got a problem. What's the problem? Well, driver so-and-so was in the sleeper berth all month. Okay. Well, what happened the month before? Well, he was in the sleeper berth the month before. So to cut to the chase, how long? Well, if you go back 6 months, he's been in the sleeper berth. We already had the fuel. Well, he's bought 350 fuel purchases, and you're in a sleeper. He says, what do you think the DOT is going to say about that? I'm going to say, at least they can't get us for a fatigued driver, maybe hauling around a dead person, but they're not going to get us for being fatigued. That was 30 out of 90 false logs. The carrier would have gotten a conditional, but because of COVID and they hadn't changed the regulations where they could issue safety ratings offsite, auditor sit there and said, I got you conditional, but I can't give it to you. Take this as fair warning to learn. So really tough the larger you get.
Now for the countdown. At number 10, a podcast featuring small car hauling fleet Souza Trucking out west. As fuel tops $7 a gallon in owner C.G. Souza's native California and the Supreme Court's potential ruling on AB 5, the state's contractor law, was imminent. The High Court ultimately would in fact decline to hear California's trucking association's challenge to the law, holding import for C.G. Souza's relationship with at least one leased-on owner-operator in his 5-truck fleet. More immediate for his concern, though, was the days prior spotting of a 7 in the dollar column of a truck stop's diesel price sign in Madera. Souza was speaking here for an early June edition of the podcast, with fuel about as high as it would go over the course of the year.
It's tough. I mean, I don't know where it's going to finally end, when it's going to finally break. I mean, somewhere it's got to break. I mean, realistically, it at $6.50 to $7 a gallon, it's pretty much costing every truck out there $1 a mile to run just for diesel.
$1 plus, in some cases,
yeah, in some cases $1 plus, and it's like, you know, you have to take that into account. I mean, you know, you figure you do a 300 mile run. I mean, you take $300 right off the top of that right now. So it's it's harsh. And I keep, you know, inching my rates up little by little. You know, my customers have been pretty susceptible to it. They're like, you know, we understand, we get that. This second round, now that we're high 6s, you know, I've gotten a lot more pushback basically, and you know, I'm like, you know, it's out of my control, you know, you know, and I think it's not so much they don't understand, but I think they're just as much upset about it as we all are. So, but yeah, I mean, the trucking industry is gonna, you know, if you're hauling cheap freight, you're basically digging your own grave. There's no room for that anymore, and we're gonna have, you know, probably a lot of guys unfortunately go out of business, and you know, it's gonna be a major hurt. And then when things do break loose, then we're going to be even more of a truck driving shortage. And, you know, the guys who do make it through it, they're not going to be able to keep up. You know, it'll be kind of a feast or famine, and it's going to be a big feast at that point. And, you know, we're still going to have product issues getting through to, you know, to everybody. And, you know, the supply chain, you think is bad now, it'll be even worse come when that time comes. So, we're just riding it out. I mean, that's what I've told my guys, you know, because they've asked me, what are we going to do? I'm like, we're just going to keep riding it out. I mean, you know, it's the point to where if we can't make money, we might as well park them. But, you know, that's not going to do anybody any good either. So we're in a tough spot. Everybody's in a tough spot right now. You know, not just little guys, but big guys. I mean, it's going to be real interesting what happens here in the next 6 months, you know, and I think it's going to come sooner than later. You know, I know people are saying it might be, you know, a year, but I'm thinking it's going to be a lot sooner than later, especially since I've already seen $7.14 a gallon for fuel here. We're here. It's happening now. So, getting through the summer will be real interesting. We'll have to keep our fingers crossed and see what happens.
Part of what did happen was Sosa's second annual A.J. Sosa Memorial Truck Show later that same month. Something of a salve for tough times. This was the case at truck shows all around the nation throughout the show season. At one of those shows earlier in the year, Overdrive Radio's own Long Haul Paul Marhoefer made the acquaintance of Kentucky headquartered professional driver Kobe Langham. Like Marhoefer, also a songwriter and whose expertise dented the ears of many in the Overdrive Radio audience this summer. Number 9 in the podcast countdown selected parts of his Years on the Road EP and Long Haul Paul's introduction of the artist and Downey & Sons company driver.
Holler blood is hollering. It's November and the corn is almost in. Mountain uphill, swallow these hills. Line the pockets of the suits on the Capitol Hill. Them all-American girls with all-American curves have had their day in the sun and the rain.
Ever stumbled across a recording artist on the web whose stuff was so good that you were left dumbfounded by the fact they weren't more widely known? Kobe Langham fits squarely in that category. But here's the icing on the cake. He's also a trucker. 2019 had been a banner year for Langham. His EP, Kobe Langham and the Citizen Band, Years on the Road, was being mentioned in the same breath as Tyler Childers' Country Squire, as Sturgill Simpson's Sound and Fury by the publication Kentucky Country Music, which named his record one of the Commonwealth's 10 best for 2019. Something seismic was going on in the bluegrass state. One writer had called it a country music insurgency, and artists like Sturgill Simpson and Tyler Childers were at the vanguard. But Langham was quietly making a mark of his own.
A lot of it is, I would consider, honky-tonk music. That's a lot of what I gravitate towards as far as what I listen to. I wanted it to, I just want it to sound like country music.
Flowers are dead, so I threw them out, but those pictures are still in the drawer.
Like when somebody listens to it, I want them to think I'm listening to country music right now. And a lot of as far as the production and the actual sound itself comes from my friend Tom Nato in Lexington, who produced all the stuff we've done so far, and he also played all those steel guitar parts. He, especially the first few things I did, coming in as a completely green novice, having no idea what I was doing, he was really good at directing me in the way I wanted to go without me feeling like he was taking over things. You know, he gave me a lot of help without taking control. You know, everything always came out sounding like I wanted it to sound. So Tom Nato was a big part of that.
Also in that same podcast, Overdrive executive editor Alex Lockie, who joined our staff here at Overdrive just in 2021, made his Overdrive Radio debut with a talk featuring Arian Rule's story about his stunning 10 Dimes 1993 Peterbilt 379. Here's Rule responding to Lockie's question about his favorite part about the long custom rebuild of the rig.
My favorite part of the truck is not even the truck itself. It's the relationships building the truck.
Right.
And that's why it's named 10 Dimes. You know,
Right.
Al Capone said 4 quarters are better than 100 pennies. I'm fortunate enough to have 10 dimes. You know, I got some really good people in my life that.
And so for Rule, the truck stands as monument to those relationships forged through history in and around and under the piece of equipment. And what a piece of equipment it is. You can catch a few views of it in Alex Lockey's story about Rule at overdriveonline.com. Navigate to the custom rig section. When Lockey was speaking with Rule, he reflected on the upcoming wedding day the owner-operator had mentioned as a chance to truly feel and communicate the gratitude for a life well lived with all of those you know best and share it with the most. What Lockey didn't yet know?
Yeah, that's great. Today. No way.
That's here. We're getting married here.
No way.
Yeah, we're getting married right on that finish line at 7 o'clock tonight.
Are you kidding?
Yes. Yep. That was her idea.
Fitting for the 2022 truck show season, no doubt. A big congrats to Arian Rule and his better half on their nuptials at the Gear Jammer Truck Show in Keene, New Hampshire. Number 8 in the podcast countdown featured our 2021 Small Fleet champ, Jason Cowan, and his Henderson, Kentucky-based Silver Creek transportation business, recorded when I visited the Small Fleet in February. He took me through the office with a mind to detail just how a new hire might experience the Small Fleet to begin with. You'll also hear Silver Creek Safety Director Amber Jenkins in this selection from the talk about a culture of communication the Small Fleet owner has long labored to foster.
When we bring a driver in, typically that's the first place they start. So we want to tell them our story because you know how it is when a driver comes in. Hey, what do you pay? You know, and that's not what we're looking for. We've talked about all that a million times. So we just begin to say, okay, here's our culture, where we started. Yeah. You know, we kind of had this wall. I guess it kind of makes it's what I call a storyboard. Where we started, you know, what we're doing, and you know how we're making it happen, and some of the things that we do. So what we do is we walk through the building, and you know we tell the story of where we came from and what we did, and how we get back to the community. That's one of the things we talk about. The FFA is one of the groups that we spoke with at Zeb when he was in high school. So the local magazine did a story on us back in October about our trailers, the trailers that we do for the different nonprofits. And so, we kind of build that in as to, hey, this is what our culture is. Because then we have Amber. You remember Amber?
Yeah. Hey, Amber. Hi. Good to see you.
And so Amber's the one that keeps us all, one of the cool things that I learned years ago was that, I'm not good at everything. I think I am.
Right.
And so, it's good to have people that are good at what they do. And because it's hard, she's better at telling the driver you have to do this than I am. I'm like, oh, come on, guys. She's like,
he likes to be likable.
Sure. not so you, huh?
And it's funny. Everything we just keep talking about it, culture. I just want to, and it's not perfect a lot of times, but I wish it was. But it's create a culture of that. I think one of the hardest things with these drivers is to get them to buy into the vision that you have. That they're not just here, not just to they.
Where it's more than words, right? Like it's.
Let's say you have one, instead of them coming in and saying something to they'll quit, and then you talk to them 6 months later and like, oh well, I backed that trailer over a pole, and I thought y'all'd be mad at me, so I got me another job before you fired me. But
right? Yeah.
We weren't going to. We talked about that yesterday. We had a trailer damaged, and it was damaged bad. And nobody said anything, and so I told her. So, in part of her safety video this week is to say, "Hey, look,
yeah,
And she actually put it in. We don't fire people for tearing up equipment, but we got to know
the problem.
It could have been a safety issue. It could have been a lot of things, and so we want you to tell us that. And then I think she didn't put on there, but I put on. It's better to have Amber fuss at you for a minute and watch a video than to hurt somebody.
Another award winner was featured in what ended up being the number 7 most listened to Overdrive Radio episode of 2022. Owner-operator of the year, Glenn Horak. Joined in this podcast by his wife and now fellow team operator, Carla. Horak, in the midst of higher than ever fuel prices, knocked on wood that his long history of profits would continue according to plan, with retirement in sight. In the selection that follows, Glenn Horak harkens back to the last time fuel had been as high as it was for much of the year. In from the huge recession that followed in the year 2008. His diligent approach to maintenance savings, productivity with his long career, mostly leased to Prime out of Springfield, Missouri, though, kept him in the black through all of it. The biggest testament to that is the Horak family you'll also hear much about in what follows.
Knock on wood, I've been here 30 years. I've made money every year except for 2008 when nobody in the industry made money. We really didn't take a loss, but it wasn't pretty. I actually put a lot of fuel on credit cards that year. That's when Carla came out with that. After that year, that's when Carla came to work and we got everything paid off and back on track.
How was the transition for Carla? Was it the first time she had come out on the road as with a CDL?
Yes. Yeah, I trained her. Yeah, she was working at Macy's before that. Working at Macy's raising kids.
How many children do you have?
I got two, a boy and a girl. My son he works for Mercy Hospitals in their IoT department. And my daughter works for Peterbilt there in Springfield, Missouri. And my son, he lives with his girlfriend there. They bought a house together and stuff, and they've been together quite a while, so I don't see. Ain't neither one of them in a hurry to get married if things working like they are, so. And my daughter's a single mother. She got 2 biological kids and 3 adopted kids. Yeah, she was married, and it was a bad issue, so.
Okay.
Now she's a single parent.
Do you guys spend a fair amount of time with those grandkids, I imagine, when you're home?
Oh, yes. Yes. I hear it from my kids all the time. Well, why didn't you spend money like that on us when we were kids? Well, I didn't have it when you were kids.
And looking back to that other time when money was in short supply, the 2008 year owner-operator Horak mentioned earlier, well, Glenn's longtime life and now driving partner then told her story of joining Glenn on the truck around the time. Partnership between the pair, as it extended into the professional realm with their trucking business and into the cab, was sold in part by Glenn as a way the two could see some of the country together. Most places for the first time, if not for Glenn himself. That sales pitch, though, didn't always work out as advertised, as husband and wife hauled to erase debt taken on during the financial crisis of the Great Recession. And remember, Carla Horak was working at Macy's immediately before she went out with Glenn to train and get her CDL, but this wouldn't be the very first time, anyway, that she piloted a large vehicle.
Well, before I went to Macy's, I drove a school bus for a couple years.
Okay.
And I got fired for that job because the kids didn't like having to follow my rules and sit down and behave themselves. But if you talk to a couple of boys in the shop that rode my bus, they said, man, we liked you the best. So go figure. But yeah, when I quit there, then I went to Macy's. And I think I was there for 8 or 9 years. It was fun trying to follow his directions. Such as out on the training pad, he was trying to teach me how to back, and his terminology and my terminology don't match. His come around with the steering wheel is like, no, I turn left or right. I don't know what come around means. That's, you know, right. I wasn't out here. I mean, I'd come out with them a couple of weeks, different times. You know, Mom would stay with the kids, and I'd come out with him for a week or so. Right. And the one year I went out with him, he had the doghouse still. He had that was absolutely horrible. No air ride seats. I mainly sat up on the doghouse because it was more comfortable to sit in the passenger seat. And I said, no, not till you get a different truck.
Hauling in that cab over at the time, for Glenn, it marked his brief turn from Prime in his early days there to Dart Transit out of Eagan, Minnesota. Which didn't last very long at all before he was back leased to the Springfield, Missouri headquarter fleet. Carla remembers that cab over well. Right.
He didn't realize till he took a shower I had a humongous bruise on my leg, and he said, what's that for? I said, I told you the door handle keeps hitting. He reached over there and yanked that door handle off and turned it around and slapped it back on and tried to put a towel on it to keep, but it didn't help because even the front of my knees were hitting the front because with no air ride, you're stationary and you'd hit the bumps, your knees would hit the dash. And it was much nicer with his later trucks.
Yeah.
When the kids were born, they were still little when he started Prime. I want to say Ashley was in kindergarten, kindergarten or first grade, one of the two. And they each went out on the road with them. Right. So with my son in Scouts, he got to get all his little patches from all the states. And my daughter stayed out with him, and she had a good time. He took her to the beach and Six Flags in Texas. And so they got to have a good time when they went out with Dad. Then they got older and got into sports and stuff, and that kind of stopped. But it was definitely different.
This year's fuel price shock delivered different things to different people. The Horax, for instance, running very late model aerodynamic equipment, hauling relatively light loads as much as possible, beat Prime's fleet average fuel mileage by a couple and more miles per gallon, meaning they're banking a good portion of the fuel surcharge earned on every mile. For others, the calculations were somewhat different, and as spot markets softened throughout the year, pushing a broker up to an adequately profitable rate got more difficult for many than in the couple of boom years preceding. Number 6 in the podcast countdown took us straight into such calculations with multiple guests explaining bulk buying and fuel card strategies, including, again, Jason Callan of Silver Creek Transportation, as well as National Association of Small Trucking Companies President David Owen, who spoke to the difficult dynamics at play in fuel markets this spring.
It's a $500 a day problem for a trucking company. So if you don't have some kind of deal, or trucking diesel, and all of my stuff starts with Genesis and works its way through the Old Testament. But the EPA is responsible for a lot of what's going on with fuel. The EPA, for the last 50 years, has made it impossible for us to build refineries. And by that I mean they've made it so hard to make a refinery profitable that nobody's built any. And so that's one problem. It doesn't make any difference what kind of fuel is demanded. If we don't have the refinery capacity to refine it, we hit upon a shortage, and our reserves, according to what I read, stockpiles of refined diesel is at its lowest level since 2014. Let's say that you've got, whether you're at the truck stop level or the oil company level or the wholesale fuel level, whatever fuel level you are, and you've got X number of barrels of fuel or an X number of gallons of refined fuel to sell, and the wholesale price goes up, 50 cents in a day. Well, don't you think, well, maybe I should hoard some of this lower priced diesel and wait for the price to come back down, because I'm going to have to replace it with fuel that's 50 cents higher. Right. And guess what? I'm going to have to raise my prices. Right. And if I raise my prices too far, I lose my business. People go somewhere else. Yep. So people just don't understand all of that. And where we are now, because of all the decisions that have been mostly by government, we're getting ready to really have a supply crunch. At the same time, when we're coming out of the COVID crisis,
big demand.
So huge demand right now, pent up demand. Yep. People want to get out and buy stuff. And they can't get it. And it's affecting everything. It affects the supply chain. And I don't know whether it's a cause or an effect of the disruption in plastic. It's hard to know. Then we got the war in Ukraine. So globally, oil,
panic mode, right?
Everybody's trying to scrap around and say, where am I going to get my oil? And we can't fight wars without oil. Right. We can't feed the world without oil. And yet it seems like our central government is doing every damn thing they can to vilify the whole oil industry and think that they can just turn the switch and everybody's going to be riding a bicycle or a goat or an electric vehicle. Right. It just makes it so so much more sense to me. Number one, to recognize, quit vilifying people like me. I'm not against the world being cleaner.
Yeah. Totally.
I've always been for that. But let's don't try to just eliminate the use of fossil fuel until we've got something to replace it with. I'm for spending money on research.
Incentivize efficiency.
Sure.
Meantime, right?
Incentivize us to build a refinery. It's exasperating to me, and it's not. It doesn't affect us much because trucking, believe it or not, learned their lesson in 2007 through 2010. They came up with what is called fuel surcharges.
Yep.
So up to a point, they can get the consumer or the end user or the shipper to at least to help absorb some of the rise in cost of fuel and still make a profit. When it gets to the point, though, when they can't make a profit, guess what? They park their truck.
30 Trucks Silver Creek Transportation wasn't there when our conversation took place. Very early on after Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the big price shock that ripped through fuel markets. Here he is later in that same podcast describing his dual bulk buy and fuel card strategy, one achievable in various forms by one truck owner-operators too, as David Owen later pointed out. Sometimes long-term bulk contracts backfire though, as Cohen notes happened to him in 2020.
We contracted our fuel, for the first of the year, thinking, well, we've got a pretty good deal, and then, COVID hits, the world shuts down, fuel goes, 70 cents cheaper, and so then you're like, wow, you just got to ride it out, So our strategy that year was we hadn't bought it for the entire year, so, we were able to hold the contract until we had to, hoping, that through the year it would come back up. You're not hoping, but, through the year it would come back into play, and so, you learn.
You're buying bulk for delivery. Are you buying under that same contract when you're out on the road?
Well, on the road we have a contract with our fuel card vendor, and that gives you a discount. And to us, it's one of those things where I think for small carriers, you have to realize what is the benefit of having it bulk versus out on the road. If you always use a fuel card and your drivers pay attention and go where your discounts are, you're probably just as well off up to a certain size just to use the fuel card. And then once you have to put the pencil to it, and once you get to buying so many tanker loads per month, then it makes more sense to have it here. A lot of times to have it here is really convenient though. They can fuel and be gone and don't have to worry about buying on the road or that kind of stuff. So we're probably out of our trucks, maybe 7, 8 of them are local all the time. So that makes it really, like this guy, it's really handy, and he can, they don't have to stop anywhere. They can just do their thing. So those are, it's like everything else. You have to put the pencil to it and see what. I guess one of the things for us about the trucking business is you have to be the businessman first, and then you're the trucker second, because you have to do what makes sense in business if you want to stay.
And that very priority, business first, driving second, to modify Jason Cohen's formulation just a bit, that business first priority dominated an informal discussion that aired on the podcast following our March Partners in Business seminar, introducing the updated edition of the Owner-Operator Business Manual we've long co-produced with the tax specialists and business consultants at ATBS. This number 5 episode of the podcast countdown explored, too, the motivation of independence all-around trucking with Rayshawn Lucas, who you'll hear starting in what follows. Joining in the discussion, too, are Overdrive's own Gary Bucks and, at the very end of the clip, ATBS Vice President Mike Hosted. The motivation toward better business, it turns out, often enough has a quality of life goal in mind for the end result. Here's owner-operator Lucas.
I focus on driver first and insulation and making sure that the company is stable, because it doesn't make sense for me to pay the driver as much as I can, and then I've given him most of my profits, and then the company is out of business 2 weeks later and he has to go find somewhere else to work. So it's maintaining that balance, and I do that through negotiation of rates. I have a formula that I calculate my fuel, my miles, and what to ask for before I go to a broker, so I can say, hey, this is what I want. And it's based on a worst case scenario. Okay. My worst case scenario. I have a break even, a worst case scenario, and if they come close to the number that I'm asking for, I'm still winning.
I came up with I mentioned that first year, I basically broke even, and I turned to my wife and I said, Marcia, this is going to be a short-lived business experience if I don't change something in a hurry. And what I came up with is a little bit different, I think, in that every load I calculated the profit separately, and every load had to turn a profit, my pay profit, or I wouldn't haul. It didn't matter. Mm-hmm. I wasn't going to move just to generate gross revenue and lose money on that gross revenue. And we have a lot of people that transition, unfortunately, and they're so used to, I got to drive more miles. If you ask someone, hey, what did you earn? They talk about their gross. Right. You know, look at these major corporations. Has Amazon ever turned a profit? I don't think it has. You know, billions and billions of dollars. They've never turned a profit. It's a great investment, I got to tell you. But the point being is setting a realistic way to measure profit. I recommend, and I've done a lot of research in business reading, taking like a 10 to 15% of what you have invested in the contract. In other words, for every dollar you have invested in that contract, not what the contract pays, you want you want $100 to $150 return profit above all expenses, including the driver, the benefits, everything, to return to the company. That's what I'm thinking. And if you're president of your company and you're on that salary, that's not on the profit side being paid. That's got to be on the expense side. That's what small drivers, I think, have trouble understanding.
As a company driver, you're instilled in miles because they don't offer percentage to the owner-operator. I mean, not the owner-operator, but the company driver. So a lot of people, when they see how many miles and how much work they're putting in and how much they can gross, if they only had their own truck, they're taking that same mentality to the owner-operator business, and some of them have a really, really hard time getting a good foothold in the door. That's why you see cheap rates that get snatched up. Oh, this is more than 50 cents a mile. This is more than 70 cents a mile. So what you're seeing now is a shift of mentality. Now it's advantageous for me to run less miles and try to maximize my revenue through negotiations, contracts, and all that stuff, so that I can make sure that I'm not overworking myself so much to the point that I don't have a quality of life. So you're seeing the people come in, they want more of a quality of life, better pay, and they're going independent. And one of the drivers for going independent may be something minute, but it's big to us: respect.
And respect and freedom.
Respect and freedom. A lot of major truck companies don't have time to invest in these relationships with each driver, so they're mechanical. They're emotionless, and you're just a number, and so they don't have the respect factor. They don't have the focus that they need on the driver.
On Overdrive Radio, regulatory discussion is never far away, and in the years since the ELD mandate came down in late 2017, early 2018, chief on the minds of many owner-operators have been FMCSA's hours of service rules. Tweaked once since then to introduce a measure of flexibility for the 14-hour daily driving window with split sleeper enhancements, among other things. In June, a couple we've heard on this podcast in years past petitioned the FMCSA for an hours of service exemption that presented an interesting prospect. Owner-operator Lee Schmidt and his wife and business partner Lisa sought exemption for leave from adhering to the daily 14-hour window, as well as the requirement to take a 10-hour break after driving 11 hours. In effect, the Schmidts were asking to be limited only by the 11-hour driving maximum in any 24-hour daily period. We talked through it all in the number 4 most listened to podcast of 2022. And the story of what spawned the exemption request stretched straight back to protests in Washington, D.C. around the ELD mandate. Here's Lee calling back to discussions with regulators at that time.
You know, I could care less if I had 10 hours to drive. Let me do it how I want.
Right.
I looked at Joe and Bill and whoever else was there. I said, I would almost bet if you walk down there to everybody that's parked on Constitution Avenue, if you said, all right, guys, we're going to keep the ELD, but I'll tell you what, you're only going to be allowed to run 10 hours in a 24-hour period, but you can do it how you want. What do you think? I looked at him and I said, I bet you almost 99% of us would say yes and leave.
Right.
I said, the biggest problem is the 14-hour clock. I said, if you get rid of that, I don't care what we have to drive. That would eliminate a lot of issues with a lot of things. I said, drivers would not stop, wouldn't have to be fighting over a split sleeper, and they would stop when they wanted to because you don't have a clock sitting in your face.
Right.
I said, there's a lot of benefits to it. Oh, that'll never fly. That will never fly. And we've been talking about this for years, that there's got to be a way to get this in. We've got to figure out how to word it and do everything right so that we can get to the Federal Register.
The Schmitz did get to the Federal Register, inspiring other somewhat similar exemption requests later in the year. The Schmitz request, nonetheless, was later denied by FMCSA on grounds that they hadn't provided sufficient proof of ability to achieve the same level of safety, but they planned to make another go at it. Here's what they hoped might be the ultimate result: real, substantial change in the hours of service for flexibility based on proven experience and proven safety, of which Lee has decades now. Here's Lisa Schmidt summing it up.
If we get it denied, we're going to
reapply.
Yeah, we're going to adjust our exemption request to handle whatever the denial's for. And then if it's approved, there's no reason for others not to get it. Right. And at some point, with data, specifically from the COVID, exemption that's been going on for 2 years, why can't we do it some kind of a tiered system or incentivize safety? Someone that has a proven record should be able to make their own decision.
Part of that podcast also remembered an owner-operator gone much too soon. Overdrive News editor Matt Cole, out at the Big Super Rigs event in Branson, Missouri this year, learned that a well-known custom truck builder and longtime owner-operator, Troy Huddleston, had passed. With the help of the many owners showing there who knew Troy, Cole assembled a big group who offered their appreciation of the owner. Here's the well-considered words of one among Troy Huddleston's trucking family.
I'd like to say a little something about my good friend, Mr. Troy. My name is Bubba Branch out of Lakeland, Florida. My company is Atlas Heavy Haul. If I had a word to describe Mr. Troy, it would be encouraging. He was very encouraging all the time for me. That's one of the reasons why we're here today. He talked to me about showing this truck, and I'd always doubt myself, and he'd always hear me, and he'd always correct me about that and tell me to stop doing that. And he'd tell you why you shouldn't do it. And I just have to say, the first time I met him, we were in Wildwood, Florida at the truck show there. I was parked next to him, not in his class. I could never have attained that high, but he was there, and he spent hours talking to me, and like he had known me forever. And that was where our friendship began there, and we exchanged numbers, and all the way from buying English Bulldogs to trucking. That's what we talked about. And but the things I can tell you about him was when we would talk about family, and he would bring up Miss Huddleston and his girls and his family. Period. He would just light up. I mean, he's a wonderful man and a great father, and he thought the world of his family and his friends. And this is part of his family too, all of us. And we knew that. He made that very clear to us. And we never second guessed that. Didn't matter what time of day or night it was. If you needed him, you could always call him. And that's just, we love him. We're gonna miss him, and he is our legend. He'll always live forever.
Troy Huddleston will no doubt be missed. Number 3 in the podcast countdown. More in the way of regulatory discussion with the Trucker Nation advocacy group's Andrea Marks in the wake of FMCSA's entry-level driver training rule. Marks offered plenty of what she called quote-unquote unpopular opinions about what various critics of the rule in the trucking community were saying as it went into effect in early February.
So prior to February 7th, trainers could have their CDL for 5 minutes and be a trainer. Now they have to have at minimum 2 years of experience. Their CDL can't be suspended. There's a whole host of requirements. That's 2 years better than prior to February 7th. I think it should be stricter, if you want me to be honest.
A lot of people do as well. A lot of people I've heard from as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think it should be 10 years. Let's see. The second biggest issue that folks brought up is they want training to be longer. That was actually not, I mean, it is addressed in training, but it's addressed in training not in a minimum number of hours requirement, which I think is a great thing. Training is proficiency based. If you need more time, you get more time because you have to prove your proficiency. If you don't need more time and you can cruise through training in, a couple of days because you can tick off all the boxes, then you're fine. And there are going to be people that can do that, but there are also going to be people that can't do that. And, what I hear, here's what I hear. And this is what really just gets in my craw is the people that are like, well, I learned from my dad, or I learned from an old timer. I learned, this, that, the other. Well, I'm so thankful for that. I learned old school. Okay. Well, you don't have to go take the training over again. You already have your CDL. So this doesn't even apply to you. So quit losing your mind. 2, learning from an old timer shouldn't be the only way into the trucking industry, nor should it be perceived as the superior ticket into the trucking industry. If there is one way that we need to be leveling the playing field, which is this, this hot ticket term,
right?
Training is where we need to do it. So, what about that inner city kid that sits on an overpass at night and wants to be a truck driver more than anything in the world, but, that has never driven a truck in his life, but knows that that's what he wants to do.
Yeah, may not have the old timer anywhere nearby.
Might not have that old timer in his life.
Yep.
Like growing up on a farm and learning from your dad is not the superior way into the trucking industry. It never will be. And I don't want to hear that it is one way. It is not the superior way.
Finally, both the number 2 and ultimately the number 1 most listened to podcasts of the year are all about what else? Bedrock owner-operator business concerns, with number 2 dropping with Overdrive contributor and longtime owner-operator Gary Books at the Walcott Truckers Jamboree in Iowa. Buck spoke at length to the psychology underpinning business ownership and the motivation owners bring to trucking. And, given where he was when we spoke, the value of networking and recharging, so to speak, among peers at events like the Jamboree at Iowa 80 and Walcott.
Right. That is one of the great benefits to people who attend an event like this. If you're a trucker or a trucker family, in the business, whatever business you're in, to attend an event like this or Louisville, these things, they are great ways not only to learn, to meet people, to just socialize, but it can become that motivation to make that move that you've talked about or thought about for even years,
right,
to improve in your business, because that self-accountability, and that's something that I find that I've become for the people I work with, is sort of an accountability partner. Hey, I need to catch up my bookkeeping. Well, guess what? Within a couple of days, they send me a note and say, hey, got it caught up after talking to you, because it's that accountability. It's like my wife, Marcia, she holds me accountable quite often, I should say. It's part of the psychology. So I talked to several people who had gotten a truck, had an accident, got put out of business because of the hardship, or started their business and failed, but they were there with the personal instinct and drive to pursue that path again,
To come back and do it again, yeah.
Acknowledging the mistakes they made. You know, the odds of success in small business, whatever it is, first time are pretty slim, to be honest. And that's one of the things that I want to encourage people to recognize is, but going to these shows like this, if you get to talk to these people, that's what gives you the motivation to get better.
Finally, when my long talk with 2021 named Owner-Operator of the Year Brian Smith aired in early 2022, listeners really took to Smith's level-headed take on trucking as an owner-operator. Generally, for me, it's his considered advice for those considering making the jump to truck ownership that stands out most brightly from the podcast. It followed a consideration the multiple million safe mile owner-operator shared about his potential early retirement, and a bit of a joke that he made about what he called the biggest difficulty he'd faced in life over the road, and being away from so much of his family's home life. To cap off the year, everyone, here's Brian Smith.
Right. So it's not necessary, I suppose, for me to be out here full time.
Right.
I kind of like it, and the money's certainly handy.
Yep.
Thinking about retiring early anyway, even if I stick it out.
Right.
I don't know. Those are all just kind of plans up in the air. Maybe I'll wait till all the kids move out and then stay at home, like I should have when they were there. So, as far as advice for owner-operators coming up, though, if I was going to talk to someone who's thinking about becoming an owner-operator, I guess, first of all, I would say drive a company truck first. Learn the industry, learn trucks, and then get an idea of what you want to do before you get yourself into, large amounts of debt and the risk involved with that. Check all your expenses, health insurance and things like that can be very expensive on your own. All the other benefits that might come with being a company driver that you would not get as an owner-operator. Right. Even workman's comp or something, what if something did happen to you? Could you pay for that truck payment if you got injured, for the next month or two? I would say learn mechanical and electrical, at least the basics of it. Learn how to turn a wrench, learn how to fix a wire that rubbed through, how to change a light on your own, all that little stuff. Learn how to change a fuel filter if you're gelled up on the side of the road in the wintertime. Get some mechanical idea, because it is very expensive to have things worked on. And if it's something that's easy that you could have done yourself, you could save $100+ an hour of labor costs doing it yourself.
And that's only been getting more and more expensive for sure in recent times, right?
Oh yes. And I would say, at least in my opinion and my experience, I would rather work with a reputable company like Leased On than I would deal with like random brokers and things like that. Now, if you found good brokers and you could do it by yourself, that's fine. Or if you, better yet, if you wanted to just go out on your own, get your own authority, if you could find at least a main customer that's willing to give you a steady, at least one-way route, and then even if you had to take random stuff back, that would be the way to do that. But to just strike out and say, I'll just find whatever load is out there from whoever has it, you may or may not get paid. If you want to do something specialized, like the big oversized, the heavy haul, the hazardous materials, stuff like that, I would say get some experience in that first.
Right.
Don't just strike out with your hazmat tanker and think that you're gonna, figure it out as you go.
Here's a Happy New Year and an absolutely huge thanks to all of you for listening. We'll see you in 2023. Overdrive Radio is a production of Overdrive, the voice of the American trucker. It's edited and produced by me, Todd Dills, with the acoustic guitar and other support of trucker-songwriter and Overdrive contributor Long Haul Paul Marhoefer. The theme is Legend of the Snakeman by Marhoefer, featuring the guitar work of Travis the Snakeman himself, Wammack, Terry Two Socks Richardson on bass, keys by Tishomingo Jim Whitehead, and on drums, Mr. Andrew Marshall. Podcast is backed up further by Overdrive's own news editor Matt Cole, social media coordinator Holly Young, executive editor Alex Lockie, and intrepid video editors Lawson Rudisell and Andrew Glenn. Overdrive Radio is sponsored by Howes. You can find them at Howes, that's HOWES, houseproducts.com. Till we see you.